One Piece fans are in the middle of what could potentially be the greatest arc in the series so far. Egghead Island has been nothing short of magical with some of the highest peaks I've ever seen in an anime or manga. That being said, however, it has its fair share of problems. Now, let me get this straight, this video is not to slander Oda or attack One Piece in any way, shape, or form, especially after that crazy last chapter. I love Egghead Island, and I love One Piece, but it's exactly because I love it so much that it's important to acknowledge some of its flaws so we can be aware of them as the series reaches the ultimate climax. The source of One Piece's most controversial conversations has always been hockey, and I've gotta say Egghead has absolutely validated a lot of the criticism in those arguments. We're coming off the back of the most hockey-heavy arc in the series where the strongest form of hockey to date, which is Advanced Conqueror's Hockey or Conqueror's Coding, was introduced. We got so many new nuances to the power system and addressed a lot of the inconsistencies that had been previously existing since post-timeskip. So why have we practically abandoned it in Egghead Island? This arc features two opponents that were acknowledged by Luffy himself to be strong enemies, so of course you'd imagine that Luffy should be going deep into his bag to pull out some of his strongest techniques. You know, the ones he used to defeat Kaido. But against both Kizaru and Saturn, the progression of Luffy's effort doesn't make sense at all. In both cases, Luffy jumps straight to Gear 5 pretty quickly in order to square up against his new challenge. Now to me, this does not make any sense because Gear 5 is clearly his most draining ability out of all of the ones he's used in the past. Why would he skip over and not use the ability that caused the biggest jump in power for the main character ever that we found out in Wano? Why not use an ability characterized as not touching your opponent against an opponent who is literally invincible and can't be touched? It just doesn't make any sense to me that Oda completely ignores the power that would very obviously be the most useful in Luffy's current situation. I know Oda likely just wants to draw Gear 5 because it's been in his head since the beginning of the story, and I totally get that. I'd imagine it's a really fun form to write about for him, because it's also a really fun form to watch for me on screen, but that does not excuse the gaps in the writing of the story. Now, hold your horses, I know you're probably commenting right now, Luffy is using Advanced Conqueror's Hockey, Oda's just not drawing it, and that's exactly where our next problem lies. I always laugh a little bit when people try and justify Oda's lack of hockey this arc by saying he just isn't drawing it. If Oda isn't actually ignoring hockey and instead is just choosing to be ambiguous about it, sure, maybe the entire first criticism I just talked about gets swept under the rug, but this stems an entire new issue in the story. How the hell are we supposed to power scale characters if we can't see what they're doing? Now, again, I'd bet money that someone's probably typing about how power scaling isn't important to the story right now and that I should just enjoy it how it is, and I actually agree with you to a certain extent. Well, only if we're talking about the nitty-gritty pixel scalers in the community. I truly believe surface level power scaling is very important to the story. Seeing the established order of certain titled characters like Admirals or Yonko boosts the world building of the series and adds a ton of tension to certain encounters. And we see this plenty of times with characters acknowledging the pecking order that's set in the world of One Piece. But when Oda decides he's not going to draw, or in an even worse scenario that I mentioned before, completely ignore the vehicle that drives that order of strength in the series, we lose a huge chunk of what makes One Piece so good. The biggest two examples of this in Egghead is the Seraphim and Kizaru. The Seraphim are most definitely an opponent Luffy should be cleaning up pretty quickly considering how he dealt with Kaido, and I know it might be a hot take, but I personally believe Kizaru falls into that category as well. So when we see Luffy struggle with the Seraphim, and then go pretty even with Kizaru, it only ushers forth questions about the validity of the fights that Oda's drawing. Was Luffy taking Kizaru seriously? Nah, he wasn't using any hockey. But why wouldn't he use hockey in such a desperate situation to save his friends? Oh, maybe he was using hockey and we just couldn't see it. So he was going all out and couldn't beat an Admiral after defeating a Yonko? He also struggled against the Seraphim and he's a Yonko now. Well, maybe he wasn't using hockey against them either. But why not? He literally states how tough they are to break. Why not use hockey right after that? Maybe Oda just wasn't drawing it? Do you see what I mean now? It just opens up the door for countless conversations like this one. If I'm constantly looking for an excuse or some kind of explanation to justify a missing aspect of a fight, it takes out so much of the enjoyment in watching some of my favorite characters in the story fight each other. The last problem I'd like to address about Egghead Island is pretty isolated from the previous two I just spoke about, but I personally think it poses the greatest threat to the series going forward. Now, if you don't know what I mean by character clutter, I think a really good way to exemplify this point is answering this question. Can you tell me what Brook did this arc? If you can answer that question successfully, props to you, because I think a good 80% of Egghead readers probably can't answer that, including myself. My point is that because Oda loves character writing and adding things to the story, some of our main dogs who've been here for the long haul are losing out on a ton of potential screen time. I'm always going to advocate for the little side conversations that further the relationship between characters and bolster the themes of the arc, like Stussy and Kaku's conversations in these recent chapters. Those have been some of my favorite moments in all of Egghead, but I'm more referring to the characters who have an even lesser impact in the story than these two do. The biggest perpetrator in this arc is, you guessed it, the Vegapunk satellites. I really enjoyed the concept of Vegapunk's mind being split into different characters, and I think it meshes really well with the similarity of the Gorosei and their potential relationship to Imu, but I personally think a lot of them were really uninteresting and almost felt like filler characters, despite getting more screen time than some of the Straw Hats this arc. Although I don't think this flaw is as prominent during Egghead as the other two flaws, I do think that as the series goes on, Oda is going to get even more ambitious with including characters from all parts of the world, especially in the final war. And me personally, I don't want the future greatest arc in Shonen to be completely ruined by characters stealing the spotlight from the actual cool characters in the story like the Straw Hats. Luckily, I do think most of the characters in the final war are going to play to One Piece's biggest strength, that being the fact that they're all characters we've already seen previously in the story with an actual impact on the narrative already. But this still doesn't really stop me from worrying about having a larger scale Dressrosa meltdown in the final arc of the story. Now, like I said before, I want to reiterate, it's only because I love One Piece so much that I'm able to criticize it so harshly, and I seriously only want the best for the series, so don't take it too seriously if you find any of this offensive at all, or if you really like Egghead, because I also think it's really good. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Let me know what you feel in the comments if you like Egghead, if you think these criticisms are unreasonable, or if you want me to criticize another arc, and I'll take a look and see what I can do. See you next time.